Hello, this is Mark Beneteau from the Circling Guide podcast. And we have a very special show for you today because I have with me my friends and partners, Darrell, Duane, and David Swedlow. So you guys want to wave to the crowd?
Hi, this is Darrell, Duane.
Hi, and this is David Swedlow.
Okay, guys. So Darrell runs an intentional community in Washington, D.C. called the Glow House, of which I am currently a very happy resident. Darrell was trained in Boulder Integral T3 circling program, and it would take
Actually, San Francisco, Boulder T3.
You were trained in San Francisco in the T3. Okay, got it. It would take me many minutes to list Darrell's various projects and interests. Just to name two of them, he runs a very large Burning Man community called Camp Contact, which includes both dance, acro yoga, and authentic relating components. And he's also creating community around universal basic income on the blockchain through a site of his called cryptoubi.org. And David Swedlow is a certified facilitator with Circling Europe. He's presented at the World Future Society, South by Southwest Interactive, and the American Creativity Association. David is committed to co-creating effective practices of interdependent human thriving. I love that, David. So it's a great pleasure to be with you both today. So here's what brings us together. So all three of us have been very impacted by a recent podcast by Zachary Stein, who is a writer and futurist, on his recent article, which is called Love in a Time Between Worlds, on the meta-modern return to a metaphysics of eros. The full article was published in the Integral Review and is also available on Zach's website. And Zach Stein was recently interviewed by Michael Garfield on the Future Fossils podcast, episode number 97, which is a truly wonderful podcast. I actually became a Patreon supporter of Michael Garfield after listening to this episode. I was so impressed. And plus, Michael needs the money as he is becoming a father soon. So we do want to support that, do we not?
Absolutely.
Okay, good. So I'm going to start us off with this 9-minute clip of Zach Stein on the Future Fossils podcast, which I'm sharing with Michael's permission, of course. Now, how it's going to go today is I'm going to start with the audio clip. And then Darrell, David, and I are going to check in and do what's called topical circling, which basically means we're going to share ideas and impact and riff off each other, as it were. And for those of you unfamiliar with the idea of a topical circle, it is simply a circle in which we allow more latitude for the sharing of intellectual content and ideas than we do in a regular or strict relational meditation circle, while still holding connection intent as primary as we do in regular circling. Meaning we're sharing ideas, but also emotional impact and hopefully valuing our connection through this process. So let me kick it off with Zach Stein. He's describing an emerging philosophy called meta-modernism, which is both a philosophy and a movement which we believe has significant implications on the practice of circling. And we'll check in after this.
We live in a time between worlds and a time in which the deepest questions about what it means to be human are kind of on the table again. It's like there are neuroscientists seriously suggesting we don't have free will and arguing we can change the legal system, which is predicated upon free will, by the way. We can change the legal system. We can change the legal system to say that there is no free will, the serious suggestions. And also, of course, does God exist? Is there an afterlife? Is there reincarnation? The nature of illness, the nature of healing. All of these things are scattered in this kind of post-truth cultural desert where you're not sure which one's a thriving oasis and which one's basically a mirage. And part of that's due to the internet, and I talk about the kind of structural way that the post-truth culture has been generated by the very logic of the communication technology. But it's also a moment, properly speaking, in the evolution of culture, which is to say it's a rightful overcoming of the singular logic and logocentrism and monocentrism of modernity. And so the postmodern proliferation of perspectives and the concomitant confusion is par for the course, but it's of course a dangerous, critical, global path now through the confusion back to reality. And so I talk about a return to eros and a return to a metaphysics in which not just physical things are real, but also the things that populate the human interiors, and especially the constellation of emotions around love, that these things are as real as any of the physical properties. And so this gets to, again, the nature of reality and the need to have a more nuanced metaphysics that doesn't just materiality and meaningless matter and motion and Darwinian dynamics, but that includes meaning, value, interiorities, consciousness, etc. Right? Totally. So, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the framing of the paper is in terms of the cultural epoch or kind of historical periodization, right? Which is to say you can slice history into, the history is this very complicated stream. You can slice it into periods or epochs. And so there's a group that is, mostly in kind of Europe, and there are some American representatives who have kind of dubbed the emerging period of history that we are entering as meta-modern. And I think it's an important conversation because I was convinced long ago by Habermas and others that what we call postmodernism is actually most of the traits of modernity, just with the volume turned really way up. Like subjectivity increases, contextualization increases. Instead of one perspective, you get many perspectives, not the pre-perspectival pre-modern, where the individual and the group are fused, but this hyper-individualism flourishes more under postmodernism. So this idea that there must be a cultural turning in which we can critique both the postmodern and the modern, and we can value both the postmodern and the modern, which is to say there's something that's distinctly non-modern or meta-modern, which will get a name later. We're not sure what it will be. That's the way I hold it. Then an integral theory, which I discovered very young, like in my 20s, like I was 20, literally, when I read Sex, Ecology, Spirituality. I see this now as a species of meta-modern philosophy. And there are many varieties of meta-modern philosophy. Not all of them are integral theory. Integral theory is one that I started with and like a lot. But there are other candidates, meta-modern worldviews. And so, one of the things that makes a cultural period a period is that there's some coherence to the structure of it. And so this list you talk about in the beginning of my paper, it's a list of the things that kind of characterize the meta-modern historical period's view of reality and science. And it's distinctly different from the postmodern and the modern. Right? So the modern view of science is that science is the truth, period. And the period's very definite. The postmodern view of science is like science is one view, ... Right? Like there's actually many, and science is one. The meta-modern view essentially tries to say that both of those are true. And as you were saying, within a specific context, science works and actually discovers things. The problem is that it oversteps its context. And so it takes, for example, an experiment that was done in a very closed condition in a laboratory and pretends that what's discovered there applies to radically open systems outside the laboratory. Right?
And that's where you get pharmaceuticals in the drinking water, because we
precisely
push this thing through.
No, that's a perfect example, and that's exactly the danger of the modern view, which is correct in the laboratory, guys. Like, don't take in. So the postmodern sees that moment of error in the modern and then wants to throw science out the window completely. The meta-modernist says, hold on, something happened in the laboratory. Like we have to actually pay attention to the moment of truth in the modern and then, contextualize it with the postmodern, alternative, which says, well, let's do a bunch of other experiments. Let's do things that don't even look like experiments, right? And let's look at methodologies that are non-quantitative and methodologies that are phenomenological and purely subjective, which a modernist would never even touch. So you get this proliferation of methods, proliferation of perspectives, all good, but now a total fragmentation. And out of the academy comes totally confusing gobbledygook about what is the nature of the human.
I think I've listened to that recording at least a half a dozen times, and every time it kind of moves me and excites me for some reason. It's very powerful, yeah. So David, why don't you kick us off with your impact on that, and anything else that's up for you, by the way. We're not limiting this conversation in any way.
Yeah, thank you. I first just want to say, thank you guys. I've been listening to Michael Garfield for a while, but this this conversation. I'm excited that it's stirred up more people as well, and it really does. There's a vibrancy that Zach Stein brings to the conversation that I think has been missing up till now. I, like both of you, I've been studying Wilbur for a while and actually participated in some of his courses back in 2005. And I've had this sense that there is some way to bring all of this to a more ideal way that we can relate to each other. I mean, my whole thing of wanting to have I'll say I was impacted as well by Buckminster Fuller and that whole sense that we want a world that works for everyone. And there's a way that has always felt a little bit theoretical and too far off. And there's a frustration around that. And even with participating with Wilbur and everything else, there's just this way in which it feels like we can't seem to get the grounded root of how do we get started on that. Mm-hmm.
As in heads on sticks, yes?
Yes. And so my experience with circling was a way for me, my introduction to it came at an intuition of saying, I think there's something my body has to contribute to the conversation that I don't know how to hear. And actually slowing down enough to listen to myself while I was relating to others profoundly shifted the way that I listen. And after 3 years of practice, I find that I'm continuing to deepen in that. And so it's really this powerful way that I can see connecting to others really requires a deep connecting to myself first. What was powerful in listening to Zach Stein's interview with Michael Garfield was the recognition that we're doing that now, that we feel like suddenly we have a collective way of doing that, like the need to get to a point of being able to hear what it is that we as a collective want, we as a species want, is a deep way of it's like in this moment, I mean, it makes so much sense that we're in a post-truth era. And from where we have been so far, it's like if we could just establish the ground rules for how to interact with one another, then we could get going. And it's like we're finally at the point, I feel like we're finally at the point where that's no longer the goal. We're giving up on the notion of what are the essential ground rules to get started. All we need to do is start with where we're at. All we need to do is start with right here. And so that's where I'm super excited to see what arises when we actually just meet each other, meet myself, look in the mirror very clearly and say, here's where we're at.
Thank you, David. That's beautiful. What I'm resonating with is slow down long enough to notice what's going on within you, and that's all we need to do. So let's just put that into the space and let it simmer for a bit. Okay.
Thank you. Yes.
Okay. Cool. Okay. Oh. What are your thoughts, Darrell?
Yeah. So I think you touched on some great stuff there, David. Particularly the embodiment part and listening to our bodies and not knowing how to interpret what our bodies are saying. I've recently, have ongoing, also had a frustration with language. And there's this idea that language has so much power, but I think a lot of people give it too much credence, and then some other people don't give it enough credence. And I was very interested to hear about this book you mentioned, something about the alphabet and the body. David, you might mention that.
The Alphabet versus the Goddess by Lynn.
Yeah. Great. Definitely on my reading list now. And I want to contrast the intellectual aspects of Bucky and Wilbur with also wanting to get embodied. What does the embodied Mr. Fuller look like for us? How can Wilbur get more embodied? And maybe that's what Zach is kind of able to reach here in this, and that's certainly what I'm wanting, no matter what we do. But I think there's a lot to be said for kind of thinking about how like that, just that question, how does anybody in a given interaction get what they want? And how are we creating more than win-win? Like win for you, win for me, and win for the rest of the world in each of our interactions. And yeah, but that's really complex. And we're getting to a place where we're able to have technology and spirit and human connection and awareness of our bodies enough that it's plausible. And I'm hopeful that this is maybe what Zach is saying when he's talking about kind of this new return to metaphysics. There's some new, like I get deeper in his podcast. I think he says something about, we mentioned this, that there's this in postmodernism, everything's okay, or everything is what it is. People are just who they are and what they are. And we still have that, yet there is some unifying sense of the human or of beingness. And a while ago I was wondering, what would the human mission statement be, or what would the Earth's mission statement be, getting to like a Gaia hypothesis sort of thinking. And what if everybody knew what that was, or was able to interact with it at some level in each of the decisions that we make day to day to co-create the emerging consciousness and activity that is happening here. And I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you, Darrell. That was very inspiring for me as well. Sort of this idea of a triple win, me, you, and the world. I love that. So here's what I want to say. So listening to Zach Stein made me feel less alone, in that I can see now that I'm part of this movement, which he calls meta-modernism, and which I liken essentially to the planetary emergence of integral to your consciousness as an integral theory, including transcend of left and right politics, right? And this is a worldview that I feel has quite profound implications to the theory and practice of circling. So this is what we're going to talk about. This is a circling podcast. So I'm developing two platforms, just very briefly. One is a circling guide, in which I'm basically trying to educate and inspire people to learn about and practice circling. And not just in formal circles, but also with their loved ones and business partners, a practice that I have called in my book, guerrilla circling, as in guerrilla warfare of the underground love revolutionary army, haha. Darrell's giving the thumbs up here. And my other platform is the man-woman education platform. And I could say a lot more about history with circling and my ongoing love affair with the practice of circling and with the circling community. But let's get back to meta-modernist philosophy here and its implications. So from my perspective, and Zach Stein really helped me to see this, is circling to me is a very precise and very powerful application, or maybe instantiation, of this meta-modern philosophy into the field of human loving, of the fundamental challenge of learning how to love and be loved, including all the obstacles that are put in our way, which of course include developmental trauma and our social conditioning. And what I am really trying to do in my life is to bring this question of love back into the public conversation, but in a practical way, which I think Zach is doing. And this is really what has me so excited. I mean, it's very intellectual, but it's also, it really resonates with me in a lot of fundamental ways. And this is why I'm so excited about circling, because I believe that circling is perhaps the fastest and most direct way of becoming a more loving person, or learning those skills, of becoming a more whole and more complex and more generous, more interrelated and happier person. Yes. And I think you guys, thanks, Darrell. And I think you guys, I'm a circling groupie, and you guys are not very far behind, particularly David.
Yes.
So I'll just give one frame here, and then I'll just move to the topical circle, the frame which is meaningful to me, which illustrates the nature of circling as a integral or meta-modern practice. And so I will name one of the core principles of circling, which is welcome everything. Welcome everything, right? But for me, for this to work, it needs to be a very active welcome everything. So it needs to be done within a relational container in which we truly attempt to understand and connect with what the other is bringing. So this would be in contrast, for instance, to a postmodern approach, such as Fritz Perls' famous quote, "You do your thing and I do mine, and if we meet, it's beautiful, and if we don't, too bad," right? So it sounds good, but somehow to me that doesn't satisfy, because it doesn't actually speak of our deep human need to connect and to relate to each other through our differences and to find common ground in our shared humanity, which is really where the juice is, which is really where the joy is. So I think, let me just put that into the space and see where we want to go from here. I know you, David, you were relating a very powerful experience you had earlier. It was project with Hazel-Grace Yates in Austin. I don't know if you want to say more about that, or
yeah. Actually, I would love to, because I think it speaks really powerfully to what we're talking about here, and it's really starting to see how this authentic relating movement is starting to bring to the fore practices that do touch deeply into that eros. The thing that I would say, just in introducing that, and hearing you, Marco, the thing that really stands out to me is this conversation is like, I feel like we're ready to really get started having this conversation, because I'm finally able to listen to myself. It's like I'm no longer requiring that you be some certain way before I engage in the conversation. I actually can be in a relation with myself in a way that brings me forward, and now I'm actually available to have the conversation. That said, the course that I took with Hazel-Grace Yates is called Healing the Divide. It's born out of I'll go ahead and say the Cock Project and the Pussy Project put together. It's men and women actually healing the shame around sexuality. And while I am aware of my own sense of shame around sexuality, I had no idea how central that was to the difficulty I find in connecting to other people. And as the day is the course is really a day of men first speaking and women witnessing, women then speaking and men witnessing, with specific questions. And the specific questions, guide me to a deeper experience of what is my actual authentic experience of myself as I have grown up through this way in which I orient to my sexuality. The thing that moved me the most about it was opening myself up, having been given the opportunity to speak first, to really delve into my experience of my sexuality with other men, opened me up in some profound ways. My heart space just expanded. And from that place, actually moving into witnessing the women, I just noticed how powerful and distinct the experience is for that listening. And I was able to hear myself, to hear new subtle nuances of ways in which I wanted to listen to myself. And it's the thing that's really powerful is just how much that I crave that. I mean, it satisfied some deep yearning inside of me that just brought tears to my eyes. It just allowed me to actually hear what it was that I wanted from connection.
Yeah, and it brought tears to my eyes, David, when you first spoke about this. And what I'm hearing is the women speaking. Yeah, it's coming to me now. Actually, the grief is that the women speaking reflected something inside you that you found a listening for.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah, it's I don't know if it captures it, but the sense is, if you will but listen to me, we can really dance.
Right. Which is what they want, right?
Right.
That's the sense, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And the challenge there is us opening to that request and then making the request and then making the request in a way that's actually enrolling, right?
Right. And my own personal practice has been, I'm actually hearing parts of myself make the same request. I'm aware that I've been attempting to solve this problem from an intellectual space, and circling has given me a capacity for listening deeper than that. And now that the way that I frame it is, I'm actually looking for authentic partnership between my heart and my brain.
wow, it just feels really soothing.
Yeah,
Come to that conclusion.
Yeah, yeah. Do you have any thoughts on that, Darrell, or any impact at the moment?
I mean, it sounds, the chakra framework really resonates for me in this. And I think most of our life's mission as humans is to integrate the connections between each of our chakras. And, that's pretty nebulous. It's like easy ways you're saying.
Yeah, I get it.
But where's the next step in that, or how are we able to better know? I have this fantasy of little chakra watch that tells us how we're doing, nice glowing stuff. And maybe someday we have better awarenesses of that can be measured and shown and coached as we co-create. Cool. And until we do, we have circling as the tool to get real and let those withholds become not withholds anymore.
Sweet.
That really is beautiful. It reminds me, just in saying that, while the practice has been how can I have authentic partnership between my heart and my mind, in some sense my third eye and my heart chakras.
Okay.
There's another part that the workshop with Hazel-Grace Yates did with me yesterday, which is including the second chakra.
Yes.
Like noticing the way in which that subtly makes it challenging. And really what you're saying, that really excites me from the perspective of noticing the interplay of all of the chakras as I'm going. And in some way, I'm curious if there's some way to do a topical circling of the different chakras. There's really a way of including that I think is a powerful way of opening myself up to myself and into the world.
Yeah.
So I mean, we sort of started with Zach Stein and Zach Stein, and then we we seem to be moving to the topic of the masculine feminine split, heart and head. And if you'll allow me, I want to introduce another frame here. This has always spoken to me quite powerfully. This is from the Course in Miracles. Nobody is healed alone. Nobody's healed alone, right? I think why this speaks to me so powerfully is it's just the recognition that we do not exist in a vacuum, that we're deeply impacted by the social conditioning and the moods and emotional conditions of the people in our environment, right? And so contrast this to a postmodern idea that we all create our own reality, for example. Subtext, you and you alone are responsible for your healing and transformation. That's the subtext of you create your own reality, which of course is true. We do create our own reality. We have a choice how we respond to people and events and so forth. And we're also, we also have to respond creatively to the challenges arising out of our, characterology and traumas and so forth. However, the idea that we create our own reality is a vast oversimplification of the truth of our humanity. And it can actually be damaging. It can be damaging because we can take this idea that we create our own reality, first of all, and use it to guilt and shame ourselves, right, when we're seemingly failing to create a reality that we like, right? And it can also lead to a kind of hyper-individualism in which we can imagine we can solve our problems by ourselves, by some new and improved structure or thought form, right? Which in most cases is false. That's not going to happen. In most cases, the most direct way to solve our problems is to start showing up to ourselves and other people with more honesty and vulnerability. Okay, I call this communicating truth with care and care with truth. And David, when you talk about slowing down to listen to yourself, that reminds me of this.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really powerful. I love that observation that just from a postmodern perspective, we create our own reality is a way in which disconnecting from, it's a way that can be used to disconnect from myself and from everyone else, right? Yes. It can be a victim blaming and I'm independent, I don't need you, and since you're creating your own reality, stop fucking it up, and then let's actually just connect, right? So right. Both of those have a way of actually distancing us. This actually speaks, Marco. You and I have talked about that idea, this concept that I have of the opposable self.
Yes, talk about that.
It's beautiful. So that sense of the opposable self, like an opposable thumb, are distinct perspectives that come together. And if I'm not aware of the connection, it comes across as oppositionality of either or thinking, in which there's a sense of headbutting and fighting over the truth. And from the point of contact where if I imagine where my fingers and thumb touch, that from that oppositionality, if there's a fight, I actually can't get the sense of your perspective because I'm asserting my perspective so much. But the real sense of it is the dance happens whenever I find our commonality, the union at the other end, which is really deep within myself. So the deep sense of where I'm actually connected to myself is specifically the point that feels most challenged in that oppositional perspective. And when I can be with myself there, suddenly something opens up and something shifts, and I can hear myself and hear you newly, and the dance really becomes possible.
Mm-hmm. Right. So back to, just to reiterate the idea of the opposable brain. Our brains are designed to be opposable so that the two parts can get into connection and reach a higher integration. Yes.
Right. And when they're just off, there's a sense of dissonance. And actually, it's the dissonance. If I'm listening closely to the dissonance and how the dissonance impacts me, rather than trying to fix the dissonance, I actually can become in harmony just from noticing the point of impact.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Does that resonate, Darrell?
Yeah, I hear you. This reminds me of the subject-object dilemma.
Yes. Right, the subject-object shift. Yeah, I talk about that a lot as well.
There's another aspect of this, which there's a way in which what you were saying before, that freedom of choice, and Zach Stein speaks to this as well, right? We're starting to get to a point where free will is actually brought into question.
Yeah, I love that the idea that the legal system is totally based on the existence of free will, but yet there's now this idea, and I wanted to learn more about it, that maybe we can't count on free will and holding people accountable.
Right. Well, and I've wrestled with this myself so many times. What I notice here that's interesting is, as I look at it, it looks like where I have freedom is in choosing the context with which I'm interpreting the frame, what this conversation is about. So the impact actually can shift, right? What happened. What's in the room is in the room, but I can actually listen from different perspectives and settle into myself. So the point of opposability, in a way, can shift in a way that opens up the conversation. And it's specifically for me being attached to one specific perspective that makes that hard to do. But when I notice I can relax the attachment to one perspective, I then can allow other perspectives to arise and free myself from that frame.
Yeah, for me, real truth is paradox. I don't believe something until I find some contradiction to it or some anti-truth to it. I don't think real truth is just simple statements of the sky is blue. And
right, and I think that's exactly what Zach Stein is saying. Real truth is extraordinarily complex, in both modernism and postmodernism. Are make a farce of the job of actually finding real truth, right?
Yeah.
So, I think my thought on this, guys, is I actually pretty firmly believe that we have much less free will than we imagine, because we're just basically, controlled by both social conditioning and by what's it called, physiological patterns, obsessive brain loops, physiological loops, etc., addictions.
And then the third new thing is is our gut enzyme, or our gut.
Yes, right. The
bio.
brain, what's it called? The brain-stomach link. That there's a lot of research and discovery being made about that.
Yeah, there's all these other
Like we almost have a second
entities.
brain. We almost have a second brain in the digestive system. It's not a brain. It's a collection of microorganisms.
That aren't us.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, but this reverts back to what you were saying, David, is that, even if it's only true that we have 10% of the free will we want, by gaining awareness of those areas where that may be true, paradoxically, it gives us more free will.
Absolutely.
Right. And it'll certainly give us more peace and happiness and relaxation because we can stop hitting ourselves for being the way we are. Right.
Right.
I've been trying for 30 years to do an hour of yoga upon awakening, and I haven't succeeded yet. But I still hope to reach that state one day. In fact, I might start tomorrow. Who knows? Why not?
Yeah, it's so absolutely. That's exactly right. That sense that by actually naming that point, it feels like, the thing that's amazing is I almost want to fight against the idea that I don't have free will. I want to, it reminds me of in the Matrix movie when Morpheus asks Neo, do you want to be in control of your life? You want, there's a sense that, yes, I know what you mean. That feeling that you're out of control is almost untenable, that you don't have some say in your experience. And if I'm not actually willing to look there, then I am at the effect of my circumstances.
Exactly. If you're not even willing to contemplate the question, you're automatically a victim of that question.
Right.
It's beautiful. I should watch that movie again, actually.
It's a powerful one. It really is.
Yeah, it's a brilliant movie, really. It's a psychologically very, very brilliant movie.
I want to bring it back, Marco, we had an earlier conversation about this idea of the cult. So
yes.
I want to mention.
Yes, and let's wrap it up with that if we could, because I think we got some good content here.
So part of where this comes to mind, it's in my mind all the time. When I think about intentional community and utopian visions, I'm aware that there's something that's unaddressed in that. There's something that seems to go sideways almost every time. And in particularly, just recently, I've been watching the miniseries on Netflix for Wild Wild Country, where Osho or Sri Rajneesh has been, it went so sideways.
Yeah.
And
I watched that for 6 hours straight, by the way, David.
That's powerful.
I think I ended at 4 a.m.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty. It's deeply powerful and impacting just to watch from both sides, right? The thing that's so amazing is watching the way in which both the Rajneeshis and the Oregonians were willing to thwart their values in order to get to some perceived need met, right, and completely obliterating both of their truths, the stated truths, in order to get to that.
Right.
And so the question for me is how do we be aware of that so that doesn't sneak up? And it was so interesting. It's clearly a point where they're not acting from free will.
Right.
And so the question for me is how do we start this conversation in a way that doesn't lead to that same kind of self-delusional chasing myself down that rabbit hole and losing the essence of what it is that I'm really after.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's sort of the topic of really what we're trying to achieve here of the opposable brain, of holding the two perspectives simultaneously. Right?
Well, so the shift we've made in the conversation here is about taking that free will part to the community. And what point does the community take away free will from its members through cultish or influence or culture of that community? And at what point are people,
Right, and I'm extremely happy that you named that, Darrell, as you are, you know, the official leader of the Camp Contact cult. Right?
Yeah, sure. As it were. I don't, and I work very hard and ask myself constantly, how does this community of dancers and people going to Burning Man festivals exercise its free will? And we're not we don't use a democratic model. We don't use consensus per se. The other part of that question is how can we make it most efficient to have people do that? And so there's things like duocracy, and how does distributed leadership happen or collaborative leadership happen? And then things like holacracy and sociocracy come to mind, but I'm not sure those are suitable for that either in all the way, but there might be some parts of it that can come. And then how does this expand out into the rest of society? Which leads me back to that question: what is the biological based mission statement? What are all of our organisms trying to do day in, day out, and how can we make it more efficient or more practical and not waste people's energies or have people going off in different directions that don't serve that greater mission?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And you know what, Darrell, I got to give you a big shout out and a big appreciation for, you know, for the work you do at Camp Contact. No one is getting paid here, not even you. In fact, you're losing money at this.
That's
as
right.
Far as I know.
I contribute.
Right.
In lots of different ways.
Yeah, and you know, basically bringing together a, you know, quite large group of people in a collaborative venture that includes you know, all the logistical support.
Sure.
And programming for, you know, Burning Man at Camp Contact and all the different regional burns that we do, and really trying to optimize the transformational value and you know, that's a very, very complex problem. You know, how do we keep this thing going with, you know, some kind of reasonable level of chaos that doesn't overwhelm and operates at least as efficiently as we can, while at the same time maximizing, you know, people's contributions, right?
Yes.
Right, and this is a problem that I know you think about every day and maybe every minute of the day, right?
Sure.
And sometimes you screw up, and I've seen you suffer when you screw up.
Yeah.
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 Well,
I want to go ahead, David.
I'd like to say as well, you know, this year at Burning Man was the first, my first interaction with Camp Contact. And there are two things that come to mind, really. One of them is it truly is the art of emergent relational thriving, right?
Absolutely.
Just this beautiful way in which the whole comes together. And your presence is so subtle from a governance perspective, right? You're almost invisible from a governance perspective, but as I watch what you're doing, so beautifully weaving the pieces together and kind of listening for that conversation that allows people to step forward continually. Right? So each person kind of recognizes, in a way, what do I feel is missing that I want to contribute to the space, and that contributes to the whole. It's just beautiful. So yeah, I mirror Marco. Really want to acknowledge you for
thank you.
Powerful.
Those are really sweet words, and yeah, I'll take them in a little bit, and I also want to push them right back at you. Okay, guys, so you saw something that you liked. What are you guys doing to do the same thing someplace else?
Thank you. Perfect. Accepted.
Cheers. Cheers.
Okay, now. Okay, guys. You know, I'm feeling full. I'm feeling happy. I'm ready to stop there. If there's any kind of burning things you guys want to do, and then we'll move to debrief. I'm going to record the debrief, but and we'll publish it depending how it comes out. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, David. I think we're on to something powerful here, and I look forward to future versions of this with other topics.
Thank you. Yeah, same here. Same here. Extremely thrilled. Yes. Okay, Marco.
Maybe I've already checked out, just to say I'm happy and full. And do you guys have anything Anything more?
I'll say I feel like in a real way this is just barely scratching the surface, and yet it feels like a significant scratch. It feels like a toehold into something very powerful to continue the conversation. So I'm excited. I'm excited about this moment in time and where we're at, and kind of setting the context for continuing beyond now.
I think we're sort of in significant alignment about what we want to create and how we're going to do it, which is pretty significant. Okay.